Today's Teacher Tip Friday on a Saturday is all about classroom hacks for handling large classes. As you know, if you've been following me this year, I have been blessed with a large class. I welcome the new students, but there are additional management strategies that you have to employ when you have lots of students in one small space. So today I'm going to give you some tips on handling large classes to save your sanity, and hopefully you may have heard of some of these, but hopefully there'll be at least one that will give you a new idea that can improve your classroom management. So without ado, let's get started. Tip number one of the largest challenges with having a big class of students is fitting your desks and still having enough space to move around the classroom safely. This year, I had 28 students that were rostered to my class. I actually ended up only having 26 of those students. I went online and I literally just searched best classroom arrangements for 28 students or for 30 students. And these are some of the ideas that I came up with. My room was actually pretty long and more narrow. And so I had to choose an arrangement that would work the best for the shape of my classroom. So it will depend on what shape you're working with, but this is the seating that I actually ended up going with. This is called, well, they're calling it stadium seating, but I've heard it called herringbone seating, where you basically are pointing your desks in kind of like an arrow shape towards the front of the classroom. The nice thing about this is that your student desks are pretty close together, but yet your students are facing away from each other and can still see your board in the front. So when you're doing direct instruction, which I knew I was going to be doing more of this year because we have a new reading program that relies a lot on direct instruction, I wanted my students to be able to all see the board, to be able to focus, but yet to not be worried about what everyone else was doing. With this type of arrangement, the students are really just seeing the backs of each other's heads unless they turn around, which, you have to train them where their face should be pointed during your direct instruction. I actually ended up with 3 rows like you're seeing here, and then 1 long row in the back to accommodate the rest of my students. So depending on how many you have can depend on how many would be in your back straight row. The only trick I will say with this seating arrangement is that my students tend to keep scooting forward more and more. And so I would recommend that you in some way mark on the floor where they need to be pushing their desks back to, so that at the end of the day or even at lunchtime, a couple of times a day, you can say, get back in your seating spot so that everybody can move their desks back and you don't end up with everybody crowding you in the front of the classroom. Overall, though, this has been a really good seating arrangement. I really feel like it has worked well. The one thing I had to consider when my class was lining up was that I basically had to have my students line up on a diagonal. So here's my classroom door where I'm pointing here. And I taught my students to line up on a diagonal up to the door. And then these students lined up against this back row straight. So that took a little bit of learning, but now my students do it like that. And it's working really well for us. It also eliminates a lot of the cruising around the room because there's not a lot of room for them to do that. So it does kind of break that up. And I've just found it to be a great seating arrangement. Other arrangements that I've tried in the past have been one similar to this with the combination seating. Depending on the number of students, you can have these desks facing each other in table groupings, and then you can have a couple of U's. I've also done one right here where you have table groups. Let me make it larger so you can see it. Where you have table groups, and this would actually be 2 desks unless you have actual tables that you're using. So this would be 2 desks together, 2 desks together, 2 desks together. So you have 6 in each, which you can see from the seating that's available there. If you have a more square room, you might consider doing one like this. That's a U shape, and you can add extra seating inside of the U. But this does not work with the shape of room that I have this year. I'm not so sure that this seating arrangement will work very well either, because with my room being long as it is, a lot of my students in these extra groups would end up being really far from the board and not necessarily having a good view of the board. So these arrangements work better for a more square room. Hack number 2. Organization. You need to be very thoughtful about where you're placing everything in your classroom so that you don't have a lot of students standing in the way of the door, standing in the way when it's time for them to pack up at the end of the day. You really have to spread things out around your room. And so you can have supply stations that are in different spots. I chose to have my students' supplies all in their desks, individual supplies, because I found that if students were having to get up and get supplies, or if we were having to share, I would have to have a lot of baskets of supplies, and keeping up with all of that and making sure at the end of the day that everyone has enough materials is kind of a chore for the teacher when you have a large class. So making sure that every student had their own supplies in their own box in their desk actually was the best solution for me personally, for having a large number of students. Community supplies are fine, but when it takes so much time for students to get what they need, it's not necessarily the best idea. And the more students you have, the longer it's going to take for you to get things. Another thing about organization is color coding things. Color coding is such a friend to you if you have a large classroom. It really works for any classroom, but a large classroom, it definitely helps even more. So one of the things I have done this year is color coding my library bins. The library is typically something that gets kind of messy and you have to keep putting it back. So I purchased these round sticky dots. These colored dots, I put them on the backs of my books, my classroom library books, and then I put another of the same exact color on the front of my library bins. I organize my library books by genre, so all of my students know that they can put the book in any basket that has the same color as the color dot. So this allows students to easily know where they can place a book when they're reorganizing things. If they see it in the wrong basket, it's easy for them to return it to the correct basket. The easier you make things for students, the more the students can do for you. And in a large classroom, that is your goal. The more the students can do for you, the less stress you're going to have as a teacher, and the more you can keep your classroom straight so that you don't waste time. You can definitely waste a lot of time in a large classroom if things are not put away where they need to be and easily accessible when you're starting or ending your lesson. So use your colors. I've seen teachers that have color-coded each subject, color-coded materials for table groupings. It just depends on what you like to do and how you like your classroom to be set up. Since I have my students' supplies in their own desks and their own cubbies, I haven't had to color code their table grouping supplies this year, but the library definitely has saved me some frustration with the color dots. Use color to your advantage in any way that you can. Classroom hack number 3 for a large classroom. You have heard teachers with their fancy attention calls, peanut butter, jelly, things like that. Sometimes it will work. Those things will work for certain classes. I find that one of the difficulties with a large class is getting everyone to stop when they're in the middle of something so that you can give a direction for either wrapping up the lesson, or you're noticing that students are a little bit off track, not doing exactly what you had envisioned, and you need to bring them back, give a direction in the middle of the activity, and then start them up again. My favorite attention getter during this type of moment is to say, just kind of in my quiet voice, if you can hear me, raise your hand and close your mouth. If you can hear me, raise your hand and close your mouth. And I just walk around the room and I repeat that, but I use a quiet voice. So students hear me talking and they have to get quiet to hear what I'm saying, but they're also seeing the other students raising their hand. And because we use this frequently in our class, they know what's up when they start seeing other students raise their hand, that this is what's going to happen. And you don't even have to teach your students this one, because if they're listening, they'll start putting their hands up and other students just notice, oh, their hand's up and their hand is over their mouth like this. And so they just start copying. And then once you have the majority of the class doing that, then you can say, if you can hear me, clap once, clap twice. If you can hear me, put your hands on your head. If you can hear me, put your hands on your desk. If you can hear me, look at me and get quiet for directions or something like that, whatever you want them to do at that moment. But make sure that if they're in the middle of activity, especially cooperative learning, that you make them put their hands on their desk or in their lap so that they're still. If you say put your hands on your head, most of the time they're going to put down whatever they have. Not all students, so you might have to specify if they have scissors or something like that. But overall, this seems to work like a dream at any age group, and it's something you can do to quiet a large class very quickly. One of the challenges with having a large class is making sure that you're paying equal attention to all of your students and that all of them are getting their needs met. So grading can be a little bit tricky. Communication can be a little bit tricky. Getting to know them can be a little bit tricky just because you have so many students that you need to go through. So I like to say pick 5. I've heard this as pick 3, but in a large class, for me, I have 25, 26 students. Picking 5 each day means that I pretty much get through all of my students by the end of the week. And I'll just throw that last one in there so that I definitely have a touch with each student every week. That's very personal and intentional. So by pick 5, I might say, okay, I'm going to grade 5 workbooks today carefully. And the rest of them, I'm just going to kind of glance at and make sure they're on the right track while they're working, because I do mill around and check on them and kind of talk to them when they're doing independent work. Pick 5 to pull to your table to work with. Different things like that. Pick 5 students to write a good note home to, or to make a good phone call home to their parents. Pick 5 anything, and by the end of the week, you will have touched all of those students in your class. And you really want to make sure that you're regularly having a personal touch with every student, even though you have a large class. They deserve it, and you're going to feel so much better about how you're doing as a teacher, because face it, we went into education to make an impact, make a difference, and we can tell when our students are touched by us, when what we're doing is mattering to them, when we're taking the time to build relationships, taking the time to communicate, taking the time to give good feedback to them. All of those things will really make a big difference in how much your students learn. So it's going to fuel you as a teacher, because you'll feel like you're making a larger impact with your class. My next teacher hack for a large classroom is some engagement strategies. We just recently talked about this in one of our meetings that we had at my school. How can you get all of your students reading, writing, thinking, speaking, and listening every day? We want all of the students to be doing the same thing at the same time, because if they're waiting around to be called on, then their participation goes way down and what they're learning goes way down as well. It makes sense for all of the students to be engaged and answering and responding simultaneously if you want all of the students to be learning. So here are some strategies that can ensure that you're doing that. Using whiteboards in your class is a great way to have students respond all at the same time. I love these ones. I erase lap boards. On one side, they have the lines. On the other side, they are blank, so you can use them for different purposes. If you need to draw a diagram or something, the plain side is great. If they're needing to write an explanation, the line part is better, and so you have some different options. These hold up pretty well. And you can buy them, a pack of them. Let's see, this is 20. mini whiteboards for $25.99, and they have them at Lakeshore too, which I'm sure that the ones that you buy through the Lakeshore catalog are probably going to last you longer, but this is economical if you need something to get started. So all of your students, you ask a question and all the students are writing on the whiteboard, then holding it up. You can quickly scan and see which students got it right and which students need some more support when you have a chance to give them individual support. Another one that I like to use in my class is called Catch It in Your Fist. So you ask a question while the students are thinking, they're going to go like this. And then when they have their answer, they're going to catch it in their fist. So you have to explain to them, you don't close your hand until you actually have solved the answer and you have something to say. This means that you have something to say. So then you have them turn and talk to their partners and tell them what they had to say. And while they're doing that, you can walk around and you can hear what different students are saying. And you can probably hear about half of the class with each question. So it's a little bit less telling than when all the students are saying it at the same time. But realistically, when all the students are talking at the same time, you're not going to hear 100% of your class, but some of those kids will stand out that didn't get the right response. So I think the strategy is good also for just keeping all of your students engaged during a direct instruction lesson. It's super good for math because you can very quickly see who had the correct answer and who did not. Also, you can have all of your students think. And while they're thinking, your hands are on your head, and then you give them a signal of some kind, motion to them like a conductor would, and all of the students would say their answer choorally. Choral reading is also a great way to involve all of your learners at the same time. Another one you've probably heard of is the thumbs up, thumbs down, and thumbs to the side. But I just learned that one of the best ways to do this is to have students put their thumb in front of their bodies, because then they're the only ones who can really see it, not their partners next to them. Teacher hack number 6 for a large classroom is use blended learning when you can. Our students have one-to-one devices. Most classrooms do these days. If you don't have one-to-one devices, you can still use a form of blended learning. It'll just look a little different. You will have certain stations where students are working on the computers and other stations where they don't. Blended learning can be done in a lot of different ways. If you want to learn more about it, I'll drop some links in the description below. I am a Rethink facilitator. So I was trained in different forms of blended learning, but basically the idea is you're breaking your students up into groups. One group is working with a teacher on a skill that needs direct instruction and, modeling and feedback. The other students are working on something that's appropriate for independent work. And that is really key. You have to make sure that whatever you're leaving students to do is something that they can accomplish with very little error. Otherwise, their practice is not going to have meaning to them. So think in terms of things that it's a reading level that the students can achieve on their own, or there's an option for reading it to them and then doing comprehension afterwards. Make sure that everything that you're giving them to do in the station time is something that you've already taught them how to do that skill, unless you're just presenting the new information as like a video or something like that. But blended learning is a way that you can break your class up in different ways. So for a very large class, sometimes it's helpful to break your students in half, and half of your learners will be doing the direct instruction lesson, and the other half will be in the station rotations. And then you flip-flop and break the class the other direction, so that whoever was with you is now in stations, and whoever was on stations is now with you. I really like to use this method when there's a concept that I know I need my students to really focus on, and I need to be closer to my students to be able to monitor better what they're doing and how they're answering, so that I can ensure that they are going to have success. So your groups can be half of the class, your groups can be like 4 or 5 students or 6 students, however you want to break them. I would highly suggest that your station groups, you break the students into mixed ability groupings, so that way the students can somewhat help each other. When there's a question, they have a partner there, so they're not entirely alone. And then, of course, you have to teach your procedures, what type of voice level is expected, what type of movement around the room is allowed versus not allowed, when do we use the restroom, different things like that. My rules for my stations are that we use the restroom only at breaks between the stations and before we start the lesson and at the end of the lesson. So we have bathroom breaks, a couple of bathroom breaks during the day, but anything outside of that, students really need to wait for one of those times. So that way I can monitor who's leaving the classroom better than if I'm trying to have another student do it. I don't really like putting students in charge of bathroom monitoring because it can become a problem, and also it could become a safety issue if you had a student out and you didn't realize it and there was like a fire drill or something like that. So you definitely you want to think about those things and how you want that to run and teach that to your students before you start the blended learning. Once your students learn the routines and learn the expectations, blended learning can offer you a lot of opportunity to meet with students more individually or in small groups and to better monitor their responses to the learning. And the last teacher hack for a large classroom is to get your students helping you. If you enlist helpers for things like running errands, the cleaning fairies around your classroom, organizing things, sorting papers, passing things out, all of those things are things that your students can do for you. And with a big class, it's really important that you don't try to do it all for them. Do what you can so that they know that you care, but also it's good for them to have a role in the classroom. You don't have to have 50 million different jobs. Pick a few that are really important to you. You will know what you need help with because those are the things you're having a hard time keeping up with in your classroom. Little things like picking up paper. You can have students assigned to walk around with a trash can at the end of the day. You can have students assigned to taking things to the office, bringing things back, whatever the things are that you constantly need. Make sure that you enlist helpers so that you're not trying to do it all on your own. I hope you've enjoyed these teacher hacks for handling a large classroom. Large classrooms are not the end of the world. You can have a great year with a large class. You just have to have a lot of plans in place so that things will run smoothly and then you can enjoy your students. As always, don't forget to work hard, be kind, and amazing things will happen. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.